experts. And just for the record, today is the last educational event for Altitude for the rest of the year. So next time I see you guys, whether it's in person or via webinar, it is going to be 2022. I cannot believe the year has already gone by this fast. It's crazy. But thank you so much for joining us for our last official 2021 presentation. And for those of you who, you hear this every time, right? For those of you who have not done a webinar before, please listen in. The rest of you tune out, enjoy the meme, and we'll get started as soon as I'm done with all these housekeeping items. So if you have not done a webinar before, you should be looking at your screen, and most of your screen should be the PowerPoint. On the bottom right-hand corner is me, the presenter. Hello, I'm me. And on the left side, you'll see little icons, and there is the little talk bubble with a question mark. So that is where you would type in your questions as you get any questions when we go through this webinar. I will be going over the questions at the very end. So I did, don't worry about if I don't respond right away. It's all going to be saved for the end, and then we'll go through them there, time permitting. You will also be getting 1 CMCA credit for attending this webinar. It will be automatically emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours after this class. You will also get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. This is another one that we're waiting until after the class to send it to you, mostly because I like it to be a surprise. And then finally, or maybe not finally, if you are having any technical difficulties, please do not type in, help me, I'm having technical difficulties, because I myself cannot help you. I am here doing the webinar. I've got no access to anything, and plus my IT skills, to put it mildly, suck. So what you need to do if you're having any IT problems is you can pick up the phone and call Sean Sanders, who is our awesome education coordinator. His direct line is 303-991-2076, or you can email to education@altitude.law, and Sean will get that email as well. So again, if you're having technical difficulties, please contact Sean, because I can't do anything for you. All right, so with that in mind, should we get started? Let's get started. All right, so before we go into the discussion of using your experts and all that other stuff, I really wanted to start at the very, very beginning and talk about what an expert, really is. What is an expert? So if you look it up in any kind of dictionary, this is from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, you're going to find something like these two items, these two definitions. One with special skill or knowledge representing mastery in a particular subject, or having, involving, or displaying special skills or knowledge derived from training or experience. So basically, it's someone who knows a lot about something based on training, experience, knowledge, all that stuff. I think inherently we all know what an expert is and what an expert is not, but we all fall into the trap of listening to someone who sounds like they know what they're talking about and saying, oh, they must know because they sound like they know and they must be an expert. Well, how many homeowners do you guys get on the phone or via email or meetings that are like, this is wrong, this needs to be like this needs to be this? And they sound very convincing. And of course, 90% of the time they're completely wrong. So keep in mind, a real expert is someone who has a lot of experience, a lot of education, certificates, whatever it is, not just someone who maybe read the internet or someone who read a statute and knows nothing about the law, right? Those are our real experts. So The next question is why? Why do we need to use an expert? Experts can be expensive, they can be time consuming. Why do we need to use an expert? And so to talk about the why, we need to know what provisions in the Nonprofit Act talk to us about this type of stuff. And first of all, the Nonprofit Act does contain standards of conduct for your board members. And these are them right there, 3 things. Good faith, care of an ordinary prudent person, with a reasonable belief that the action that is being taken is in the best interest of the corporation or the association. It's in the best interest of the whole and not in the best interest of that one individual, that one individual's group of friends. It's the whole that we're looking at. And we've had whole classes that we've taught that just talk about the standards of conduct, that you can get into a lot of detail with them. And we're not going to do that today, but I do want to talk about the ordinary prudent person. A prudent person is someone who is informed. So clearly, part of your standards of conduct as board members or as community managers advising the board is that you got to be informed. You can't just, do a shot in the dark and make a decision on something that if you don't have the right information, right? And I think logically that makes perfect sense. So this is what the Nonprofit Act requires. But there's more, okay? All right, for my Star Wars fans, you do get Obi-Wan Kenobi today. Hopefully you're laughing. I thought it was hilarious. All right, so the Nonprofit Act states, in part, what I wrote here. In discharging duties, a director or officer is entitled to rely on information, opinions, reports, or statements prepared or presented by legal counsel, a public accountant, or another person as to matters the director or officer, should say or, not of, officer reasonably believes are within such person's professional or expert competence. Okay? So what is this saying? It's saying, hey, board members, hey, officers, if you're making a decision about something that you're not familiar with or you don't know inside and out, feel free to rely on an expert in that particular field, okay? Rely on them as long as you reasonably believe they are an expert. So there's some more verbiage in the statute that says if a board member or officer has reason to know that the person is not actually an expert and they rely on them, then that's obviously not going to do anything. But if you reasonably believe someone's an expert, and what does that mean, reasonably believe? I mean, you hire a contractor, you see their credentials, I mean, you can reasonably believe they are an expert. You hire a contractor, but they were just on the news as committing fraud, maybe not the best person to rely upon, right? It's really commonsensical, but for the most part, the people who you think are experts are going to be those experts, okay? So under the Nonprofit Act, one of the ways that we comply with these standards of conduct that we just read about is to rely on an opinion of an expert. All right, but wait, there's more. All right. A director or officer is not liable, you hear that? Not liable as such to the nonprofit corporation or its members for any action taken or omitted to be taken if, in connection with such action or omission, the director or officer performed the duties of the position in compliance with this section. All right. Now, we just said one way to comply with this section is to rely on an expert opinion. And what does this say? This says if you do rely on an expert opinion and comply with what's required in the section, you are not going to be liable as a board member or an officer. You're not going to be liable to the association. You're not going to be liable to the homeowners for the decision. Now, what's missing here? What's missing is the requirement that your decision has to be correct. It doesn't. Even if you make the worst possible decision, if you do it relying on an expert, and the expert was just dead wrong, guess what? You're still protected from liability. Okay? You're still protected from liability. And to me, this is kind of the end all be all. If I'm on the board, I'm a board member, I'm an officer. And by the way, community managers, this kind of extends to you guys as an agent of the association, because, you know, how many times have the homeowners blamed the community manager for all the board's decisions, right? You guys are the ones who make all the decisions. You're the bad ones. And sometimes they name the management company in the lawsuit, right? So this is just as beneficial for agents of the board and the association as it is for the board itself and the officers. So to me, this is kind of one of those no-brainers. Anything coming up in front of the board that don't have expertise on, get an expert, rely on the opinion. Okay? It's an easy fix. Now, what stops board members and boards from doing this? Well, a lot of times it's really the money, right? Oh my God, getting an engineer is so expensive. It's like $2,000. Getting a legal opinion is so expensive. They don't want to spend the money. That's kind of the number one reason I have seen boards shying away from using experts. Another reason is they just don't know who the experts are, and they don't want to ask, or they don't want to take the time. There's just a lot of laziness. I mean, those are probably the biggest two reasons why. Well, and the third one really is you don't know what you don't know, right? Sometimes boards think that I do have enough information to make a decision, and I don't know what I don't know, so I don't know I need to get, you know, an expert to talk to me about this. So that is probably, those are the three top reasons I see where boards don't use an expert. But in all honesty, given this language saying you're not going to be liable whether the decision is right or wrong, why would you not, right? Why would you not? To me, it makes no sense. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that we do have this language in the Nonprofit Act, and we should be using it, okay? We should be using it to protect ourselves. All right, little comedic relief while I take a sip of my drink. Who does not love Seinfeld? Come on. All right. See, I'm sticking to the standards here. All right. And I apologize ahead of time, gentlemen, for this meme, but it was too funny. Sorry. All right. Who are your experts, guys? Who do you deal with, you know, on a regular basis? Well, of course, I have to put legal counsel. I'll put myself up there first. Sure, why not? You got the CPAs, and, you know, the Nonprofit Act specifically calls out attorneys and CPAs, but you've got a whole lot of other folks that are experts. Insurance brokers, insurance agents, contractors, engineers, plumbers, electricians, reserve study experts. Don't forget them. And who else? I bet you guys can name off a whole bunch more people, whether it's the on-site maintenance person. And you know who's not on here, who actually should be on here, is the community managers. For boards, that is an expert for them, right? You guys are experts. So there are a lot of different experts for different fields. And it seems to me that almost anything you might have a question on, or anything you are not completely knowledgeable in, can be addressed by an expert in that particular field. So we've got experts for everything, right? Okay. So we know now what an expert is. We know why we need to use the experts, and kind of some examples of experts. So what else is there? All right, a couple other things I want to talk to you guys about. And then we're going to get into some real life scenarios. All right. So a few things. Failure to use an expert. What happens to a community where the board's like, no, we don't want to spend the money. No, we don't want to take the time. We don't think we need an expert. What happens in that case? Well, there's a lot of obviously scenarios that could come into play, but One scenario is the board makes a decision, the decision ends up being wrong, and then the association gets sued, right? And it could be getting sued based on a breach of your fiduciary duty as a board member, a breach of the declaration because you didn't comply with something that was in the declaration, whatever it is. It could be anything. And one of the things, I mean, the way that an association or the board defends itself is to say, we have complied with our standards of conduct as set forth in the Nonprofit Act, because if we've done that, we do not have liability exposure as a board. So how are we going to show that we have complied with our obligations? Well, I guess we thought we were doing the right thing, but if this is something that is outside anyone's area of expertise, for example, building repairs, right, something structural in nature, if it's outside our level of expertise, then how were we being prudent? That's really where the judge is going to come from. So you made this decision based on what? Based on the cheapest contract, based on something that your non-expert, homeowner board member told you? What did you base this on? And why on earth did you think that that was sufficient, right? So on the flip side, if we did use an expert, you'd be like, yeah, judge, this decision was wrong, but here's the expert we relied on, and here's the written opinion from the expert saying that this is what they are recommending, and we did exactly what they said. And we had no way of knowing if the expert was right or wrong, but we relied on them in accordance with the Nonprofit Act. Far better defense to do that than to be like, well, we picked the cheapest one. We wanted to save our homeowners money. That's not always going to protect you. So a failure to use an expert really does expose an association to liability. And it could be for various things depending on whatever the decision was. Owner's expert versus association's expert. Now we're gonna, like I said, when we go into some examples here in a little bit, we're actually gonna talk about this. And so the owner's expert is basically anytime you have a homeowner who reaches out to the board saying, you need to do X, Y, and Z because that's what my contractor said. So basically what they're saying is, I have an expert, they said you need to do X, Y, and Z, so you better do it, board, right? You've probably had many calls and emails along those lines. So a lot of times, both boards and community managers are at a bit of a loss. They're like, oh, well, they have someone telling them that, so what should I do? And we get a lot of calls like that. And my first response is, have you had your own expert, your own contractor, your own whoever, go and look at this situation? Because if we blindly rely on someone else's expert, we're not technically complying with the Nonprofit Act and the Standards of Conduct, which says we have to do our due diligence, right? We have to be prudent. Well, relying on something someone puts in front of your face is not really you being prudent. It's basically blindly accepting whatever is put in front of your face. And that is not going to be enough. That's not going to be sufficient. So anytime we get a call like that, we would say, look, you got to get your own person out there, because we can rely on our experts. We shouldn't be relying on other people's experts. We don't know who those individuals are. We don't know, whether this contractor is any good. We don't know any of this stuff. And so we need to conduct our own investigation. And then, and then we need to rely on our experts' advice. Okay? So there's a difference between our expert versus, someone put forward as from the homeowner as an expert. Now, our expert might agree with the homeowner's expert, and that's fine. But a lot of times they don't. All right. Board discretion concerning repairs. I think this is also an important thing to keep in the back of your mind. A lot of times these types of situations, the expert situations, have to do with repairs, rebuilding things, fixing something, where a homeowner says, hey, this is dangerous, this is malfunctioning, this is something that needs to get done. And again, even if the homeowner provides you with a copy from their, of a report from their contractor, we just said we need to have our own contractor look at this stuff. So even if our contractor comes back and says, yes, this needs to be repaired, here are some options, board, for how this can be repaired, right? You can have the gold standard, the silver standard, any of these repairs will work. They're just different price levels, and I'd be fine with any one of them. Well, guess what? It's not the homeowner's decision at that point as far as what is going to be done to repair the whatever component is. It's up to the board. The board makes that decision if it's our maintenance obligation, right? So the homeowner may say, well, I want the gold standard repair. And we're going to say, yeah, no, we're going to do the bronze one because it'll still work. And our expert says that's okay and it'll be just fine. So we're going to do that. That's okay. And it's the board's decision. Again, if the bronze fix ends up not working and damaging the homeowner's unit, the board will be protected with respect to that decision because it's relying on what its expert contractor told it. Okay, so the board has discretion. Even if repairs are needed, the board has discretion as to what repairs get made, when they are made, and who makes them. Okay, and again, all in reliance on its expert. Repairs versus upgrades. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two, but there is most certainly a difference between repairs and upgrades. Sometimes our homeowners get a little carried away and they say, oh, this needs to be repaired. And by the way, while you're repairing it, I want you to make it add X, Y, and Z to it. My drywall needs to be repaired, but while you're repairing it, I actually want you to replace it with this other kind of drywall that's more expensive and it's better and whatever. So there's a difference there, right? One is you repair the drywall that's in there. The other one is, no, you give me a brand new drywall that's a better quality than what I have now. So don't be fooled by that. This goes back to the board discretion, obviously, as far as repairs and making repairs. If the association has an obligation to maintain a component, it does not mean we have to upgrade it every time the homeowner wants us to. This is all within the board's discretion. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 points I really wanted everyone to be aware of and kind of keep in the back of your mind, because we're now going to go through some scenarios, and these are real, so I'll give you some background on each one of these and see how they play out. All right. But first, stealth expert cat. That's pretty cool. All right, let's start. So, townhome community. Owner claims she's getting water in her basement because of bad drainage and demands the association fix the drainage and pay for repairs to her basement. I'm guessing we've all seen something like this at one point or another. So let me give you some background on this one. So this is, like I said, it's a townhome. She insisted that basically the board rely on her expert, although she never provided any kind of a report, but she claimed that her contractor said that this is all because of grading and that, it's all on the association, which I also think here's a point to be aware of as well. Okay, so you've got a contractor who might be an expert as far as grading goes, but then they go outside the area of their expertise and say, oh no, this is something the association is responsible for. Are they the attorney? Do they know this? Be careful with using experts for the wrong type of advice, okay? And that happens a lot. And we'll probably run into an example of that, in another example. But just be careful, because this happens all the time. The contractors will be like, oh no, this is the association's obligation. How do you know, right? Where did you go to law school? When did you review their governing documents? So again, experts should be used for their area of expertise, not any other area of expertise. So anyhow, so this lady claims she has an expert opinion. Association asks her to produce a copy. She doesn't. Board contacts us, actually the manager contacts us and says, what do we do? I said, well, have we had the drainage examined? Has anyone gone out there and looked? No. Well, why not? Let's go look at it, because that's the only way we're going to know. So association retains a contractor, go out and look at the drainage. They're like, the drainage is fine. It's, it's pretty normal. It's pretty average. I mean, you could tweak it a little bit, but it's not going to change anything as far as that's not why her basement is leaking. All right, so what do we do now? Well, now we have one expert telling us it's not the drainage. So board calls us back and says, well, what do we do now? It says, well, have you checked with another expert with respect to, the foundation or the structure of the building to see what they think is going on? Well, in this particular case, the foundation actually was the association's responsibility, even though we don't normally see that in a townhome. And so the association, again, hired another expert, and yes, these all cost money, to go into the unit and look and see what's going on. Well, the association's other expert comes back and says she needs a sump pump. That's what's causing it. She's always going to have water intrusion if she does not get a sump pump installed. Sump pump is the homeowner's responsibility. Any kind of utilities inside the townhome under their declaration was the homeowner's responsibility. So the board, without checking the declaration, tells the homeowner, you need a sump pump, we'll go ahead and install it. Okay, so they failed by checking, failing to check with their third expert, which was legal, to see who has the responsibility for putting in the sump pump. So they basically told this woman they're going to do a sump pump, and then when they started exploring sump pumps, they found out, hey, it's pretty expensive to put in a sump pump, and we didn't budget for this, and what do we do now? Then they call our office again and say, well, what do we do now? And we say, well, why did you agree to pay for the sump pump? Well, because our expert said the sump pump was needed. So they just made a connection and assumed that because their contractor said a sump pump is needed, that was an association's obligation. But it wasn't, right? They assumed some stuff. And so don't ever assume. That's the other lesson here, don't assume. And so basically then we had to try and get him out of this mess and tell the lady, look, no, you have to pay for this. Sorry, the board is willing to contribute. And then she gets an attorney and it all just went downhill after that. I can't tell you how it turned out because it's still an ongoing thing. But at this point, we told the attorney, look, you haven't even given us any kind of a report, and we have given you a few reports. So unless you want to give us something for us to review, position stands. So that's where it is right now. But I think the lesson here is, you might need to rely on more than one expert, right? Because as you either eliminate possibilities or you have different options, each option may require a different expert. So don't assume if you've talked to one expert that you're done with your due diligence and now you've satisfied the requirement. It may not be the case. Okay. Oh, and of course the other one is, even though you may think you know what the answer is, please check with the experts before telling someone, yes, this is the answer, because you may be wrong. All right, I think we've beat this one to death. Let's look at the next one. So this one's a little similar, but not quite. So there's a townhome unit, and it's up for sale. Potential purchaser's inspector allegedly claims the sewer line servicing the unit needs repairs. Owner contacts association and demands the repairs be made to the limited common element sewer line. It was a limited common element sewer line. It was the association's obligation. Nobody had any question about that. The question really was, what do we do with the sewer line? And so again, this is one where the community manager did call our office and said, what do I do? And my first question was, have we had it scoped by our expert? No, we have not. Okay, so in this case, the homeowner actually did provide a copy of the inspector's report, okay? And the board wanted to rely on that and just spend all those thousands of dollars on the sewer line. And I said, you probably want to get your own report too, because if this is wrong and you're relying on it and you're spending all this money, there's a liability exposure for improper use of association funds, okay? We manage the money that the homeowners give us to run the corporation. If we don't conduct our due diligence before spending that money, and then it ends up we spend money on something we never should have spent money on, that could be a liability exposure. So again, get your own contractor, scope that sewer line. They did. Thank God they did, because the report they got back from their expert was, there's a little kink in the sewer line, but it is in no way a threat to, the property. It is not going to cause a backup. It is not going to explode. Nothing needs to happen with a sewer line. So basically we had our expert come in and say, we agree that there is a kink, but we disagree that you need to immediately jump and do something about it because it's not a threat. So a different opinion, right? And we are entitled to rely on that opinion. So the board came back and said, look, we have our own opinion. We're not going to pay. This doesn't need to be repaired. Homeowner said, well, if I lose my sale, I'm going to sue you, and all the normal threats that we hear from homeowners. And the association said, okay. Well, homeowner did sell the house, but then he claimed he had to reduce the price by $10,000 because of that. And he wanted the association to reimburse him. You can't make this stuff up, right? You can't. So he says, you need to reimburse me $10,000. And the association said, what? No, we're not reimbursing you $10,000. He got an attorney involved. Attorney demands the $10,000. Respondents say, we're not giving you the $10,000. Eventually, they actually did file a lawsuit. So right now, what happened was the association submitted a claim to its insurance carrier. An attorney was assigned to defend them. And this is just kind of like the beginning stages. I would be extremely surprised if this lawsuit did not end up favoring the association, because they relied on an expert. They have the written opinion and they're going to be fine. Okay. So I guess the other life lesson here is people are becoming more litigious. And just because someone threatens to sue you, doesn't mean you need to bend over and do whatever they say, right? Just remember one thing when it comes to litigation, a little off topic, but just remember, this is the exact reason why HOAs carry liability policies. And it is specifically for if somebody decides to sue them over something like this, the policy is going to kick in and insurance will pay for the attorney to defend the association. And it'll pay for everything other than the deductible amount. So at least be familiar with what your deductible amounts are, so that you know what's going to come out of the association's pocket. Generally, I see somewhere between $1,000 and $5,000 for liability coverage, but you would need to check with your professional insurance representative on that if you don't know. All right. Ready for the next one? Oh, expert mode. Am I just picking on the gentleman too much today? I'm sorry. I didn't plan it this way. It just came out. All right. Next one. Fire breaks out in a condominium unit and damages that unit as well as 2 neighboring units. Owner who started the fire demands the association submit a claim to its carrier. Now, this could have been really easy if the board, I should say, didn't assume they knew what to do and said, no, we're not going to submit a claim. If they had just reached out to us or the insurance broker, they would have been told, at least for sure by us, you insure the condominium units. If the damage is more than the deductible amount, submit the claim. They didn't do that. They basically said, no, we're not submitting a claim, submit it to your own carrier. They didn't reach out to their insurance, professionals either. Well, so 2 of the 3 units, 2 of them submitted it to their insurance carriers, and their insurance carriers paid. Third one did not submit. So a month or so after all this happens, the association gets 2 lovely letters, one from each of the insurance companies for each of the 2 homeowners who submitted individual claims, saying, here's how much we paid out. You are primary coverage, reimburse us for these amounts. Yeah. So they don't know what to do. They send it to us and we say, well, did you submit a claim? No. Well, why not? Well, because homeowners have their own policy. Yeah, but you have a policy covering their units. That's primary. Well, how are we supposed to know that? Well, you're not, but you should ask, right? So this is an example of not knowing what you don't know. So you don't know to ask. So in this case, the association did end up having to actually reimburse. Now, they tried to get the money from their insurance coverage and they got some, but they didn't get everything. So essentially, they ended up spending money out of pocket to reimburse the other insurance companies, where they wouldn't have been in that situation had they just submitted a claim to their carrier and had the homeowners then submit a claim for the deductible portion. The one homeowner who did not submit a claim, he ended up doing the repairs himself, and then he demanded to be reimbursed. And again, with this one, the association ended up having to reimburse him part of the amount he spent. So basically, they took what he spent minus the deductible amount and paid him everything over the deductible. They really didn't have much of a choice on that one, because if an association fails to submit a claim when it's supposed to submit a claim, it is going to have to pay out of pocket whatever insurance would have paid. Okay, so in this case, we've got an example of not knowing what you don't know and not asking the question of an expert. So they didn't know they needed an expert to tell them, right? How do you protect yourselves from those types of situations? I honestly don't know, because if you don't know, how do you not know? I would probably venture to say that anything having to do with requirements in your governing documents, be safe, ask the attorney, right? Anything to do with insurance, be safe, ask the attorney. Maintenance, be safe, ask the attorney. Any of those types of things that aren't like crystal clear, just ask. You are gonna be far better off in the future and save more money that way than by not asking, finding out you should have asked, and then having to pay out of pocket to fix what you messed up. So that is a situation. Now, I do want to talk to you about one other situation. It's not on here, but it's a similar one to this one. And in that case, the association actually contacted their insurance agent. Their insurance agent was not an agent that specializes in HOA coverage. Okay, and that's a big deal. They did not specialize in HOA coverage, and they said, do we submit a claim? And the agent says, no. Let the homeowner submit a claim. Almost exactly the same situation. Well, that agent did not realize that this was a community created after July 1, 1992, and it was subject to Kiowa. And Kiowa A, requires associations to insure condominium units, and B, requires the association's insurance to be primary. So they relied on that guy and did not submit a claim. So the question now becomes, is the board insulated from liability because they relied on an expert? Now this expert really didn't know what he was talking about because he was not an HOA insurance broker, and he didn't know how it all worked. He didn't know anything about Kiowa and the requirements in there. That's a good question. I don't know what the answer is to that, because on the one hand, you have relied on an insurance expert, but is this an insurance issue or is this a legal issue? Is this something they should have consulted with legal counsel for? I don't really have an answer, to be honest with you. But I think this is an example of why you probably want to reach out to both, right? Because we all know, and I hate to harp on insurance, but insurance is kind of one of those things where it's both, you know, you need the insurance expert, but you also need the legal expert, because it's an overarching concept, and it really encompasses both the legal side and the insurance side. And so you're probably better off talking to both. All right. So that was my extra example here. All right. Okay, so this one, all right, I don't even know where to start. So board wants to rewrite its governing documents, but doesn't want to spend money on legal fees. Some of you are giggling, I can tell. One of the board members gets a copy of the neighboring community's new documents that was prepared by an attorney, their attorney. And since two communities are virtually the same, the board decides to use this form for its new documents. So basically, what happened was the board went in, converted this document into Word from PDF, and changed the name of the community and a couple of other things that they thought they needed to change. And thank God the community manager convinced the board to at least have legal review. So I get a copy of this, and I'm looking at them like, what is this? And the manager says, well, they decided to do it themselves and they just want you to review. And the funniest thing about this was actually one of our documents that we had drafted for another community. And I told the manager, I said, look, I said, I'm happy to do it, but I'm willing to bet this is not going to be any cheaper for them than us actually drafting the documents. Because all these documents, they're all tailored, and it just depends on what the community wants, when they were originally created, the type of the community, the number of units. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. And the manager said, I tried to tell them, sorry. I'm like, okay. So I did end up reviewing it, and I did end up redlining it, and guess what? It didn't really save them a whole lot of money, because the things that they thought they needed to change, they changed completely wrong. The things they took out, they shouldn't have taken out. The things they added were in violation of Colorado law, and some of the things they kept didn't apply to this particular community. And so the document was completely redlined. And so is this an example of, they did eventually ask the attorneys to review, so thank God for that. But what if a board doesn't, and then it just adopts this document? I think that would be a huge liability exposure, to the extent that the board tries to enforce something that's in that document that doesn't comply with the law. For example, this one, you guys know we have the new updated sign rules and flags and all that. Well, they didn't know this board, and they pretty much put all the sign language in there that was completely in violation of the new laws. So it was very problematic. And like I said, there was tons and tons of, marking it up in red. So why did they decide that they were going to do it themselves? Well, it's the age-old story of we don't want to pay, right? If it's too much money, we can do it cheaper ourselves. And we know what we're doing, and we'll just have the attorney review. Well, like I said, they did have the attorney review, so I can't say they breached their duty, but I can say they didn't really save a whole lot of money. All right. All right, I think this is the last one before we get into questions. So this is a condominium community that just replaced its roofs, okay? 2 weeks after the roofs were replaced, owner gets water coming in through the ceiling. So owner basically insists that the association pay for all his interior unit damages. 2 weeks after that, before the association looks into this, before anything happens, the owner again contacts the association and says, well, now I have mold in my unit and it's exacerbating my lung condition and I can't even live there now until the mold is all mediated, and you, association, need to mediate my mold and need to put me up in a hotel. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. Let's kind of do this step by step. So the homeowner made an assumption. They didn't have any contractor or anyone come in. They made an assumption that because the water was coming in through the ceiling, the roof was leaking, and because the roof was just replaced, that means the contractor didn't do a good job and the association is therefore negligent because the contractor's negligence is going to be imputed on the association. Now, he may not have been wrong, okay, but that was an assumption he made. And so when the board contacted us originally, we said, so do you know why the water came into the unit? And they kind of jumped to the same conclusion. Well, I guess our contractor screwed this up. Again, that very well could be the truth, but it could be something else, right? So we said, okay, before you do anything, call that contractor. It's only been 2 weeks. If they screwed something up, you're still under warranty. Call them. Have them get out there and tell you what happened. Because if it was a roof leak, did they screw up? So contractor goes out there and says, yeah, this whatever roof tile wasn't properly installed, the flashing is off. So they fixed it. Homeowner still pissed off and says, well, you still got to pay for repairs to my unit interior, which quite possibly maybe the association does, because if our contractor screws up, again, negligence is imputed on the association. But then he pushes for the mold remediation, right? And for putting him up in a hotel. All right. So once we get to mold, we say, the association's like, do we need to remediate? And I said, well, how do you know there's mold in there? Well, the homeowner told us. How do you know that what he told you was right? So, a couple of things. Get a mold expert in there, right? Get an expert in there, have them measure the levels of mold. Have them tell us if the mold level is toxic and high, and tell them to look at the mold and see how long ago it originated. Because I guarantee you, black mold is not going to originate over 2 weeks from when supposedly there was the roof leak to 2 weeks later when the homeowner is claiming there's mold. So sure enough, they had their contractor go in there, they tested for mold. Guess what? There was no toxic level of mold in that unit. They did find like a little bit of a small like mold growth in the drywall. That's it. And guess what? It didn't form 2 weeks ago, right? It didn't form just now. It'd been there a long time. So again, this is, I think, an example of a situation where the homeowner did end up being right that the roof contractor screwed something up. He was right about that. And the roof contractor admitted it. But he certainly was not right about the causation that the leak caused the mold. And that's something that they needed a second contractor for, right? They needed a mold expert to come in and A, tell them if there's mold, and B, tell them when it originated, where it originated. So the association did have some obligation to pay for some of the damage inside the unit. It wasn't that bad. but they had no obligation to deal with this little mold spot because A, it wasn't caused by the water intrusion, it had been there a long time, and B, it wasn't at any toxic level. So this just kind of, I think, supports my earlier, contention that sometimes you need more than one expert. As things start to develop, sometimes the original expert isn't going to be enough, and you need another expert for this other area of expertise that you need a decision on. Again, was it cheap for the association to get that mold expert in there? No, it wasn't especially cheap, but it would have been more expensive for the association if they just said, okay, homeowner, you're right, our roofing contractor was negligent, so we're going to repair everything. Because if they had undertaken repairing that mold and his drywall, that would have been more money. So ultimately, they did the right thing by getting the second expert in there. Okay. Oh, and of course they didn't pay for his hotel, obviously. All right. Speaking of experts, he identifies wood. So he's an expert. All right. I am now ready to look at the questions. I see there's 2 right now. Okay. If a homeowner says they have an expert that says XYZ, how does an HOA handle that comment if the owner will not provide a copy of their expert's statement? Well, as we said before, in some of the scenarios, we had that very situation. So they didn't provide a copy, but we don't care because we still have an obligation on our end to have our expert look at it. And we should be relying on what our expert is saying, not what their expert is saying. So I think ultimately, well, it makes them look bad, but B, it doesn't matter because we're going to need to get our own expert opinion anyway. What about experts related to the Florida condo building collapse? Do we know enough yet as to who may or may not be liable and to what extent? Honestly, we don't. This is like this ongoing thing, and people are being very tight-lipped about it because of the litigation, and there's not a lot of information out there, so can't really speak to that in an educated way. I don't know. Related to the sewer line story, can you explain why the association is covered by liability versus D&O? So D&O is also a liability policy. There's different types of liability policies. There's the general liability, CGL, commercial general liability, and there's D&O, directors and officers liability. They all cover liability as well as hopefully you have an umbrella liability policy. Those are all liability policies cover accusations of wrongdoing. And so a lot of times your general liability policy and your D&O policy point fingers at each other when you submit a claim. Normally the D&O policy is intended to kick in when like individual directors and officers or people are named in the lawsuit as opposed to when the association is named. That is generally how it works, but not always. And so sometimes we'll have situations where, directors, D&O says, no, this is for CGL, and CGL says, no, this is for D&O. But they're all liability policies. When is the association required to pay for a homeowner's hotel? Hopefully never. But I have seen some situations where associations did it willingly, not because they had to. I would say if the association is grossly negligent, there is a roof problem. We've known about it for a long time. We haven't done anything for a long time. There's continuous leaks. We're not doing anything about it. Now there's mold growth and we're not doing anything about it. I'm talking about like for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. If this association is that grossly negligent and now homeowner has to move out because of all these repairs that need to get made, at that point, I'd probably say, yeah, you better pay for the hotel. But in most cases, you are never going to have to pay for that type of those types of damages. Let's see. Are there any other questions before I let you all go for the rest of the year? All right. I am not seeing any other questions. So you guys, thank you so much. we'll see you next year for sure. Hope you all have a very happy and safe holiday season, and we'll see you in 2022. Bye, everyone.